Hello everyone, welcome back to my C# programming language video series. Before moving to the next chapter, please make sure to subscribe me and like this video. In this chapter, let's learn some basic concepts of programming using C# language. In here, we'll learn about variables, data types using in programming, and what is if condition, what is switch case statement, and types of loops like while loops, for loops, and some basic data structures like arrays and lists. Let's start it with variables. Variables are names that we use to store some value in programming. Basically, variable name should be unique, and we can define a variable in the format of data type and variable name. Then can assign some value related to this variable. An example, the data type here we are using is integer, so we'll type as int, and the variable name we are using is number, and then we can assign some value for this variable. When declaring a variable, you should consider these 5 points. They are: variables can contain letters, numbers, and only this underscore character. Variables cannot contain any special characters. The variable must begin with a letter or underscore. It cannot start with integer or a number. And the starting letter should be lowercase, and variable cannot contain any white spaces. Instead of white spaces, you can use underscore. And the variable names are case sensitive, and you cannot use any reserved word in programming language. When using variable, you can initialize the variable or declare the variable. When a variable, you have to use the variable in the format of the type of the variable and the variable name, and then you have to assign some value for that. When you are using a variable in this way, it's called variable initializing. In other way, you can declare a variable. When declaring a variable, we just write the data type and the name of the variable, and we don't want to assign any value for that at this moment. When you are using a variable in this format, you can first declare the variable, and then at the moment you want, you can assign any value for this. So those are the two ways of using variables in our application. Let's take a look on the data types mainly using in C#. Mainly in C#, we are using the data types like integer, double, boolean, char, and string. These are the data types mainly we are using in C# program. We use the data type integer to assign whole number values. We use int, variable name, and the whole number value. We use the data type double to store decimal number values. And we use the data type bool to store the values as true or false. We use the data type character to store some character. It can be a letter, number, or any other character. When defining a character, we use this single quotations. Please make sure not to use double quotations. The other data type we are using is string. We are using string to store some word or sentence, like when defining string values, we are using these double quotations. Inside the string value, all the letters or numbers considered as a string. These are the basic data types that we are using in C#. We can perform some arithmetic operations on these variables. Let's initialize another integer value as 15, and then let's print this. The variable num plus the variable num2. Let's run this application and check. Here you can see it have printed total number of those two variables. Let's see some other operations on double data type. Double number 2. And let's run this application. You can see it also showing the total of the variable. Let's see what happens if we change this into the minus, and let's run the application. Now you can see the difference of those two variables. Also, we can add two string variables also. Let's run this application. And here you can see when we are adding two string values, it shows as a one word or a sentence. Let's see what happens when we add a string with an integer or a double. Name plus number. When adding a string with a number variable, you can see that number variable also considered as a string and added to this and showing a sentence or a word. In C#, you can perform arithmetic operations on double and integer variables. In string variables, you can add those together using this plus operation. You can add a string variable and a numeric variable, and the final output will be a string value. Let's talk about string functions. On the variables which define as string, we can perform some functions, which makes us use them easily. So first we'll initialize some string variable as hello world. Length is a function that can use on a string variable to get the letter count of that variable. The output of this length function is an integer. So let's define an integer variable and get the length of this. In Visual Studio, you just type C and W and then press enter, and then you can see it will automatically type the console.write line statement. So let's print the value of the length. Let's run this application, and here you can see it will show the length of the string variables as 11 because there are 11 characters in this string value. To upper function is used on a string variable to convert all the letters in the string into uppercase. So let's see. What will be the output of this string dot to upper. Here you can see it prints the same string value, but all the letters are in capital format. To lower function is used to convert all the letters in the string into lowercase. Let's see what will be the output of it. Let's run. Here you can see all the letters of the string variable is showing in lowercase format. The function trim removes the leading white spaces of the string. Let's initialize a new variable and let's keep some spaces on this and another some spaces after the word hello, and then let's type the word world, and let's see how will this variable looks like in the output. Here you can see there is a space in the front of this word. Let's use this function trim on this variable and again run this application. Now here you can see the leading white spaces have removed. Index of function can be used to find the index of some letter on the string. So let's see. Let's assume that you want to find the index of the letter L in this string. String dot index of, and then type the letter that you want to find the index of, and let's run this. Here you can see it gives the output as 2 because the index of function gives the index of the first occurrence of this letter. As you can see, it has gave the index of the letter L. Last index of function can be used to find the index of the substring which occurs last. Let's see. String and last index of. Let's see the index of letter L again. So now it prints the index as 9 because it gives the index of the last occurrence of this letter. So in here you can use more than one letter as substring. So let's see what is the index of this substring. Use the index as 3 because the substring we have mentioned starts from the index 3. The function contains we can use on string variables to find whether it contains the defined substring or not. Let's see the output. Let's check the variable str contains a substring as ed. Here it gives the result as false because in this hello world there is no substring as ed. But let's change this into L and then we'll run this again. And here it prints the result as true because there is a substring EL in this str variable. We can use this replace function on string variables to replace some substring on this string variable to another. Let's define a new variable and let's replace the value L of this str function into D, and let's print this new variable and let's see what will be the output of it. Here you can see the letter L of this str variable have replaced with the letter D and assign the result into this new variable. When replacing some substring from a string variable, first you have to define the substring that you want to replace and then define the substring that you want to replace with. Using the function substring, we can extract some substring from a string variable into another variable. Let's define a new string variable and let's assume I want to extract a substring from the string variable within the index range of 2 to 7, and then let's print the output of the str4 variable. Here you can see the resulting value of this substring is this. In this function I have defined that I want to extract a substring from the index 2 to 7. So let's see, this is index 0, 1 and 2. This is the letter of index 2, and from the index 2 I want another 7 letters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's why it only extracts this string. Here I have discussed only few string functions that mainly using in programming. Rather than these functions, there are another some more. Now let's talk about if conditions. If condition is a fundamental control structure that we use to execute a block of code according to a condition. Based on the true or false of the condition, the block will execute. So, the basic structure of an if condition is the keyword if and then the condition. Let's check if the number 7 greater than number 0 and close the condition and then open curly braces, and here you can write any code that you need. So this is the basic structure of an if condition. When using this if condition, always the letter I should be simple, and then this is a block of code which execute when the condition is true. So now let's see what will be the output of this. Here you can see it prints the value true, which inside this block, which means when the condition is true, this code will execute. Let's see what happens if we change this condition as is number 7 less than number 0 and run the code. And here you can see there's no output printed because according to this condition the value is false. so this code block will not execute. This is a simple example for if condition which execute this block when the condition is true. In if conditions, there are few variants of if conditions. Previously, we learned how to write a simple if condition according to this structure. Now, let's see how to write if else condition. In if else condition, it uses another alternative block to write the else statement, which means you can type as else and add some curly braces, and here also you can write something is false, which means when you are executing this if else condition, first it checks whether the condition is true or false. If the condition is true, it executes this block, or if the condition is false, it executes this block after this else statement. When you are executing this code, firstly it checks whether the condition is true or false. If the condition is true, it executes the code after this if statement, or if the condition is false, it executes the block of code after this else statement. So now let's run this and check. Here you can see the output as the condition is false, because in this condition it checks whether the number 7 is less than 0. As it's false, it will execute the block after this else statement. So now let's change this into greater than, and now let's execute this again. So now you can see it prints the condition is true, because number 7 is greater than 0, so it executes this first block of codes after this if statement. Another variant of if condition is else if condition. In this type of if condition, it allows us to check multiple conditions. This is the first condition that we check in our if conditions. We can add another conditions within this if and else statements. We can write this as else if, and our new condition, let's check whether the number 7 less than number 0, and add the curly braces and type the block of codes that you want to execute. So let's type here number 7 is less than 0, and let's check this as the number 7 greater than number 10. So here let's change this statement as number 7 is greater than 10. So according to this else if condition, first it checks whether this condition is true or false. If this condition is true, it will run this block of code, or if it's false, then it will check if this condition is true or false. If this condition is true, then it will execute this block of codes, or even this condition also false, it will execute this last else block of code. So now let's run this and check. It will print that condition is false, which is this block of code. As number 7 is not greater than 10, it will not execute this. So it will check if the number 7 is less than 0. So even it also false, so it will execute this statement. If we change this into if number 7 is equal number 7 and then run this again, then you can see it will print number 7 is less than 0, which is this block of code. In this else if condition, you can add many conditions as like this. If number 7 equal number 6, likewise, you can add more several conditions according to your program. When you are typing a condition, you can use comparison operations like equal, greater than, less than, greater than or equal, less than or equal, and also you can use the logical operations like and or. Using these logical operations, you can check more than one condition inside a condition. For example, let's initialize some variables as number 1 and assign the value 10, and another variable called number 2 and assign its value as 20. So we can change our condition as whether number 1 then number 2. Also we change this statement as number 1 is greater than number 2, and we can change this condition as number 1 equal number 2, and we can change this statement as number 1 is equal to number 2, and let's add two conditions in here. Number 1 equals 0. As I have mentioned, we can use these logical operations to define more than one condition. Let's change this into number 1 equal to 0 or number 1 equal to 10. Here we have defined two conditions inside this if condition, and we use this logical operation to check if this number 1 is equal to 0 or it equals to number 10, and change this statement is to number 1. So let's run this condition, and here you can see it prints number 1, which is this. Now let's check the execution. In first condition, it checks if the number 1 greater than number 2, and the value of number 1 is 10 and the value of number 2 is 30. So this condition is false. So then it checks this condition, checks the number 1. If the number 1 is equal to number 2, so it also false. So it checks this next else if condition, and in here it checks if the number 1 is equal to 0 or it is equal to number 10. As the value of number 1 is 10 and it's equal to number 10, it will execute this block of code. Ternary if is another variant of if condition. Especially we use this ternary if as a shorthand way of writing if-else statements. Rather than writing if conditions on several lines, we can use this ternary if to write simple if-else conditions. So the basic structure of this ternary if condition is the condition and then the question mark and the expression if the condition is true, and a colon, and then the expression if the condition is false, and then a semicolon. This is the structure of writing a ternary if. Normally we use this ternary if condition to write simple if-else conditions. Let's write an example. Let's initialize an integer variable as number with the value 10. Assume you want to check if the value of this variable is greater than 0, and if it's greater than 0 you want to print it's greater than 0, or if it's false you want to print it is not greater than 0. So let's use ternary if condition to perform that operation. So let's define a string variable as statement. And now let's check if the number greater than 0. This is our condition, and then let's write the expression if the condition is true. So let's write value is greater than 0 and add a colon, and then we'll write the expression if the condition is false. Value is less than 0 and add a semicolon at the end. Finally, let's print our statement value. This is how we use ternary if conditions. As this is our condition, it checks the variable number is greater than 0. If the condition is true, it assigns this value to the variable statement, or if the condition is false, it assigns this value for the variable statement. So now let's run this program and see what will be the output. It will print as value is greater than 0, which is this. As the value of our variable num is 10, it checks whether the number 10 greater than 0. So the condition is true and it passed this value as the value of this variable. Now let's take a look on switch case statements. Switch case is a control structure that used in many programming languages. The function of switch case is similar to else if conditions, but this gives more clear and organized way rather than using else if. Assume you have multiple values for a variable and based on its value, you want to execute a block of codes. So in these situations, rather than using else if conditions, we use switch case as it's more clear and organized. So now let's see the basic code structure of this with an example. Let's initialize an string variable as fruit and assign the value as apple. So now let's write switch statement as switch and here and then the expression. Here we use the variable fruit and add curly braces. Instead of this variable, you can use any calculation for this. So inside this switch statement, we can add multiple case values, which means we assume that the value of this fruit can be a mango, a banana, or a watermelon, or some default thing. So to define that, we use this case statement. We define this word case and then the value that we are assuming. Let's think it's banana. If the value of the fruit is banana, let's print it as this is banana. And the important thing is this break statement. Inside this each case statement, you must add this break, which defines that you should stop executing this case statement from here. Also, we can add another statement as mango and add a colon. Then let's print this as this is mango and then add the break statement. Let's write another case as apple, then print this as this is apple and the break statement. And if the value of the fruit is not one of these cases, let's define a default case to execute. This can be any other fruit. and don't forget to use the break statement here. So now let's execute this and check. Here it prints this is an apple. So let's see this execution. We have initialized a variable with the value apple, and within this switch case statement, it checks if the variable value is banana, mango, apple or any other thing. As the value of our variable is apple, it executes this block of codes. So let's change this into pineapple and run this again, and here you can see it prints this can be any other fruit which this default code block. So this is how switch case statement works. As you can see, rather than using else if condition, this is more clear and organized way. Let's take a look on loops in programming. Loops are also a control structure that used in programming, which allows you to execute a block of code repeatedly rather than writing the same block again and again based on the conditions. Basically, there are several types of loops that used in programming, and mainly they are while loop, for loop and for each loop. So in this session we are going to learn about each loop separately. First we are going to learn about while loops. The basic structure of while loop is the keyword while and the condition, and then add curly brackets, and inside these curly brackets you can write the code you want to execute. This is the basic structure of a while loop. This condition can be a condition that we used previously in our if conditions. So now let's learn more on this using an example. Let's initialize an integer variable as number and assign the value as 5. So let's write the word while and then define our condition as if the number variable is less than 10, and then open curly braces. Inside these curly braces you can write any code that you want to execute. So let's write a print statement which prints the value of our variable. So as this a loop, it executes this block repeatedly until this condition gets false. So the value of this variable number is 5, and it checks if the number 5 less than number 10. If it's true, it runs this. We have to add another statement as number plus 1. Now let's see the execution of this. First, the value of our variable number is 5, and in this condition it checks the value 5 is less than number 10, so it prints the value of this variable, and then it assigns the value of the number as number plus 1, which means now the variable is 5 and 5 plus 1 is 6, and now the value of our variable is number 6. So when we are going to the next loop, it checks the number which is value 6 less than number 10. The number 6 is less than 10, the condition gets true, and again it prints this variable, and again it takes the value of the number as number plus 1, which is 6 plus 1, and now the value of the number is 7. So again in our loop it checks the number which is 7 less than 10. So as the condition is true, it again prints the value of the number, and again it assigns the number as number plus 1, which is now it's 8, and Again, it checks the condition. As number 8 less than number 10, it executes this block again. The value of the number will get number 9, and then again it checks in this condition and number 9 is less than 10. So again it will execute this code block. As the value of our variable is number 9 and 9 plus 1 is now 10. So now the value of our variable is 10. So again it checks if the number 10 is less than number 10. Number 10 is not less than number 10. As we haven't used any equal value, now this condition gets false. So it will not execute this code block again and it will exit from the loop. And it will exit from the loop. So now let's run and check this. Here you can see first it prints the number 5 and then 6 and 7, 8, 9, and it will not print number 10 as the condition is getting false when the value of the number variable getting 10 and exit from the while loop. Some important thing to remember when you are using while condition is you must increase or decrease the value of the variable that you are using in this condition to stop executing this loop at a certain condition. Otherwise, if you are not used any increment or decrement value for the variable, the code will execute infinitely. Instead of using this number equal number plus 1, you can use a shorthand way as number plus plus, which increase the value of the variable by 1. Let's see what happened if we did not use this increment and run this again. Here you can see it prints the variable value repeatedly without getting exit from the loop. So that's why this increment or decrement is important. Let's change this condition as the variable number is greater than 10. The value of our variable is 5 and in this condition it checks if the number 5 greater than number 10. As this condition is false, it will not execute this code block. Here you can see there's nothing printing as it's not executing this. Now let's learn about for loops. The function of for loops are also similar to while loops, but its structure is a bit different from while loops. Let's see the basic structure of for loops. Write the word for and you have to initialize some variable and a semicolon and then the condition that you want to check to run this loop repeatedly, and then the increment or decrement of the variable that you have initialized, and then open curly braces. Inside this curly braces, you can write the block you want to execute. This is how the basic structure of and for loops looks like. The difference between the for loops and the while loops is, in while loops, as you have learned previously, you have to use an increment or decrement inside the loop. But in for loops, first you can initialize a variable which defines how many times you wanted to repeat this loop, and then the condition, and then the increment or decrement of this variable that you have initialized. And inside this block, you can write any code that you want to execute. You don't want to use the increment or decrement code within this bracket as you are using this within these brackets. So let's learn about this more using an example. First write the keyword for and then initialize some integer variable as I, and I assign the value of it as 0, and in the condition I check if the value of the variable is less than 5 and add a colon, and next I define this I plus plus, which means increase the value of I by 1 and then add this curly brackets. And here again I write console.writeLine to print the value of the variable I. And now let's run this application and see the output, and it outputs the value as 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the value of this variable I. The explanation of this code is, as this is a loop, we want to repeat this code block again and again for several times. So for that we define a variable I and initialize it with the value, and then we add a condition to check if the variable is less than 5, which means as the value of our variable is now 0, this loop runs up again and again until the value of this I getting 5, and using this it increment the value of the variable I one by one in each loop. Value of the variable is now 0, and it checks whether the 0 is less than 5, and then it runs this code, and then it increases the variable value by 1, which means now the value is 1. So again it checks the 1 is less than 5. As it's true, it runs this code, and again it increment by 1, and now the value is 2. As 2 is less than 5, it runs this code again, and again it increment its value, and now is 3. As 3 less than 5, it runs this again it increment by 1, and now the value is 4, and it runs this code again, and again it increment by 1, and now the value is 5. As 5 is not less than 5, it will not execute this code again, and it exits from this loop. So that's how for loop is working. The main difference between a for loop and while loop is, in for loops we are not using an increment or decrement code inside this block of code which we want to execute repeatedly. Basically we are using this for loop and while loops when you know how many times that you want to iterate these loops. When you know how many times that you want to iterate these loops. So what happens when you want to iterate some loop when you don't know how many times that you want to iterate it? As I mentioned before, what happens if when we don't know how many times we want to iterate a loop? For handle that kind of situation, we use this for each loops. Assume you want to iterate your code block through an array or a list which we don't know how many elements are there. Using these for each loops, you can handle and iterate through loops or lists easily. So let's see how the basic structure of for each loops looks like. First we write the keyword for each and then open brackets, and inside these brackets we define a variable name and type the word in and the name of your collection, and then add brackets. Inside these brackets you can add the code you want to execute. Let's get more clear idea on this using an example. Let's define a string array with the variable name fruits, and let's assign some values for them: apple, mango and banana and grapes. Now assume you want to print each value in this array, but you don't know how many times that you want to loop. So, using this for each loop, we can run our code block according to the number of elements inside this array. Let's write our loop as for each, and then as the elements of this array is string, we define the variable as a string variable and its name is fruit, the word in, and the collection name fruits, and then add curly braces and print the value of the fruit. Now let's run this application. Here you can see all the elements of the array is printed here. These for each loops make it easier rather than using while loop or for loop, as we don't want to initialize any number and increment it to define the number of times that we want to iterate. These for each loops iterate automatically according to the number of elements inside these collections. Now we are going to learn about arrays. Arrays are basic data structure types that used in programming, which used to store elements as a collection. This is the basic structure of initializing an array. First, define the data type of the elements that we are storing in this array and the name of the variable and the values that we are storing inside the array. There are few key features of an array. The first point is the arrays are fixed sized. That means once you define the size of the array, you cannot change it. For example, if you define an array with 5 elements, you cannot add more than 5 elements after that during the program execution. In an array, you should store same type of data. I have defined the type of the elements of the array as string. So all the elements I have stored in the array are string. And third feature is after you store elements in the array, if you want to access them, you can access them by using the index of the array. When you are storing elements in an array, each element has an index. In this example, you have stored the values A, E, I, O, U, and the A is the first element, E is the second element, I is the third element, O is the fourth element, and U is the fifth element. For each of these elements, there is an index according to the order they have stored. As A is the first element in the array, the index of A is 0. As E is the second element of the array, the index of it is 1. The index of I is 2, the index of O is 3, and the index of U is 4. In arrays, always the index starts from 0. Now let's see how arrays are working using examples. First, let's define an array. I am defining an array with integer elements. So the data type is int and this square brackets to define this is an array and the name of the array and new and again the data type and brackets, and here inside these brackets define the number of elements that array contains. After you have defined the length of the array as 5, you cannot add more than 5 elements to the array. We have defined an array here, and now let's add values for the array. For the index 0 of the array, I assign the value as 10. Likewise, I assign the value 20 to index 1, To index 2, I assign the value 30. To index 3, I assign the value 40. To index 4, I assign the value 50. As I have defined, the number of elements that array can contain is 5. Now there are 5 elements in this array. So here after that I cannot add any elements. Now once you run this application, you can see it runs without an issue. Now let's add one more element for this and check what happened. And after you run this program, it gives an error as index out of bound of the array because this array can contain only 5 elements, and I tried to add more than 5 elements here. That's why it gives an error. Assume you want to print the array value which is in the index 3. Then after we run the program, you can see it prints the value 40. As this is how we can declare the array and assign the values later to the array. Now let's see how to initialize an array. When initializing an array, as the same way you have to define the data type and the square brackets and the name of the array and add curly brackets. Inside these curly brackets, you can add the values to the array. When initializing the array, you don't want to define the number of elements as this, but you cannot add any other elements to this array like this. So if you try to add some other as there are 6 elements, the index of the last element is 5. So now let's try to add a value to index 6 of this, and then let's run this application. You can see it also gives an error as previously. As we have learned, we can access the elements of an array using index. So let's see some ways we can access the elements. If you want to access the index 1 of this array number 2, you can type this and then execute. You can see it printed as 20. And let's look into some functions that are used commonly with arrays. So for that I am deleting this array number and I am using this number 2 array. Let's assume you want to get the length of an array. For that you can use the function called length. You can enter the array name and keep a full stop and then type this function. When you run this, you can get the number of elements that array contains. Now let's change the order of this array as 30 and then 50, 10, 30 and 20. Now the value of the elements in the array are not in order. So if you want to sort this into an order, you can use this array dot sort and then the name of the array that we are using. When you are executing this code using this function, the elements of the array will get sorted. To print this array in the console, we use this array dot for each and open the curly brackets, and inside this bracket enter the array name and then write console dot write line. Now run the program, and here you can see even the array we have defined is not in order, the values of the array has printed here according to ascending order. That's because we have sorted the array using this sort function. So assume we want to get this array from reverse to the front. For that, you can use the function called array.reverse, and inside the brackets you can enter the name of your array. So after we run this program, you can see it have printed from the reverse order. Previously we have printed the value of an element array using its index. So now let's find the index of an array element using the element. So for that also we are using console write line and then array dot index of, and inside the brackets enter your array name and put a comma and then enter the element that you want to find index. So these are our array elements and I want to find the index of this element 20. So I have defined my array name and the element that I want to get the index of, and let's comment this also, and after you run this you can see the index of this element 20 will give as 4. Let's check is it correct or wrong. This is the index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, and this is index 4. If you want to check whether this array contains any element, you can write it as I want to check whether this array contains an element which the value is 100. So for that I am defining the array name and then a full stop and then the function contains and open brackets, and inside this brackets I write 100. So this checks if this array contains an element as 100. So after running this application it gets the value false as this array doesn't contain an element 100. So now change this into 10 and then run this again. So now here you can see it printed as true as this array contains an element called 10. Rather than this, there are a lot of functions that we are using with arrays, and these are some basic functions that we are using with arrays in our day-to-day programming. Let's see what is list. Lists are also basic data structure used in programming to store data as a collection. Lists are also same as arrays, but the main difference between the list and arrays are fixed size and lists are variable size. That means when you are declaring a list, you don't need to define a fixed length for that list. During the program, you can add many more elements to this list. So this is the basic structure how defining a list. As same in the array, you have to define the type of the element that you are storing inside this list. First, you have to define this as the list and the type of the data and the name, and again you have to define the list class. After you have declared a list, you can add elements to it using the name of the list and then a full stop and using this add key, and then inside the brackets you can define the elements that you want to add. So same as arrays, lists also have some basic features. The first thing is lists are variable size. As I have mentioned before, you don't want to predefine the size of the list. The elements of the list that you are storing should be same type of data. And same as the arrays, you can access the elements of the list using its index. So the index numbers of the list according to the element is same as how I have explained in the lesson arrays. So to get a clear idea about list, let's learn this with more examples. Let's declare a list. To declare a list, you should add this list keyword and then you have to define the data type of the list that you are storing and the list name, and I named it as numbers, and equal sign you have to define it as like this and again the data type, and then brackets and semicolon. Once you declare the list, you can add values to this as numbers dot add 10 and 10. Likewise, you can add some more elements to the list. As it's not easy to add elements one by one, we can add elements as a range. For that, we can use the function called addRange and then put brackets. Inside these brackets, you have to define the list elements like new and the type of the elements that you are going to add, and put curly brackets, and inside these curly brackets you can add the elements range that you want to add this list. To print the elements of this list, you can use the for each loop which you have learned previously. For that, I use this for each, and then as the elements in the list are integer type, so I define integer and item in, then the name of the array, and add curly braces, and then console.writeLine. Inside this I print the elements which define with the variable item. So here you can see all the elements inside our list. As same as the arrays, there are some basic functions we are using with this list. Insert also a function that we are using in list to insert some element at the index. So assume you want to add the element 100 to the index 4 of this number list. You can do it by numbers dot insert and then put a bracket. Inside this bracket, first define the index that you want to insert. I define it 4, and next you can define the value you want to insert. So with this insert function, I am trying to insert the element 100 at the index 4. And now let's start this program. And here now you can see at the index 4, the element 100 was inserted. Then assume you want to remove some element from this list. For that, you can use numbers dot remove method and define the element that you want to remove. So according to this, I want to remove this element 3 from the list, and then let's run this application. Now you can see the element 3 is missing from this list as we have removed it. Without defining the element to remove from this list, we can delete some element from the list by defining its index. We can do it using enter the list name and then use the method remove at, and again open the brackets, and I want to remove the element which is at index 2. So according to this, the element at the index 4 is 50. So let's run this. So here now you can see the 50 is missing. You can remove all the elements in the list using the method clear. Use this clear method, and after you run this application, there will nothing print as now the list number was empty. Let's check whether this list contains the element 100. For that, we can use console.writeLine, and inside this we can check whether the numbers list contains the element 100. And then let's print this. So you can see it gives the value false as this list does not contain an element as 100. As same as the arrays, you can sort this list by defining numbers.sort function. And once you run this program, you can see the elements are sorted, and also you can reverse this by defining numbers.reverse. And let's run this, and here now you can see the elements have printed in the reverse order. These are some basic functions that we can use with list data structures. Now let's see how to convert a list into an array. When you are converting a list to an array, first we have to define an array. As the data type of the elements inside this list are integer, so I define the array as int, then add square brackets, and the name as number array, and then the name of our list, which is numbers, and then put a full stop, and then I use the function to array. By defining it like this, you can convert this numbers list into an array and assign it to this number array variable. So in this chapter, we have learned these basic concepts of programming using C# language. So now I hope you have a better understanding on these concepts, which are useful when you are started with programming. So that's up with this chapter, and here's a reminder to subscribe me and like this video. Let's meet with a new video.